Hello again, baseball romantics. Jason coming to you here with another bonus episode of the RAB podcast, joined as usual by my battery mate, Bruce. We have another special guest for you tonight, and we're really excited to have Derek Bain join us. Derek is a New Jersey-based author and baseball historian known for his deep dives into the statistical and developmental aspects of Major League Baseball. His work blends sabermetrics, historical analysis, and a passion for retro baseball video games, which I really want to talk about. Professionally, Bain has over 30 years of experience as a server and network administrator in the healthcare sector. He also serves as co-chair of the Society for American Baseball Research, Games and Simulations Committee. So some really fascinating stuff in that paragraph that we're going to jump into. Derek, welcome aboard. And is there anything you want to add to that we didn't hit on? We're glad to have you.
Well, thanks for having me. And no, I think you covered most of what I've been doing the last 10 or so years as far as my writing and my involvement with Saber. You mentioned my retro baseball gaming passion, which that dates back to probably the early 1980s. So going back to the very first computer sims, and I had growing up, I had an Intellivision, a Commodore 64, an Apple II. So kind of just runs the gamut, a lot of the consoles from that point forward, and just an appreciation and a deep love of baseball. So
awesome. Did you play a little RBI baseball on Nintendo with the little
definitely figures? RBI baseball, bases loaded, baseball simulator 1000, you name it, I probably played it at a friend's house, or
bases loaded is a big part of my childhood. Loved that game. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Derek, again, some fascinating things here. I love this sentence. Your work blends sabermetrics, historical analysis, and a passion. So when we talk about sabermetrics, I was talking to Bruce about this before you jumped on. I've got to get your opinion. I know this is a broad question. You can be as specific or as general as you like. Your opinion on the Moneyball era in regards to Billy Beane and everything that in the movie and just around that. Was that, in your opinion, a really good way to build a baseball roster and compete in the situation the A's were in that time? Just your general thoughts on Moneyball overall.
Sure. I believe that, yes, when you're up against, the budget constraints that the A's and Tampa Bay and some of those teams were facing, that you have to get creative. So that's definitely one way to, looking for different ways of approaching, the way to build a roster. And one of the things they exploited was on base percentage.
Yeah.
Until a few years later, everybody caught on and everybody was doing it. So then you have to pivot again. So,
right.
But yeah,
isn't that the way all baseball teams
right.
operate? One team does something, and the other team says, "Hey, wait, that's a cool idea." Kind of like the openers in Tampa. And then all of a sudden, a year or two later, everyone's trying the opener, right?
Everybody copies the winning formula. So yeah, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, all 30 teams can't win. So, but yeah, I believe I'm kind of, yes, while I'm a numbers guy and I like, building different rosters for computer sims and writing books about these things, I feel like it should be like a little of everything. There's also the eye test, and I think those things are still valid as well. That it can't just be based on numbers, because you're going to miss some of those things that really aren't quantifiable, maybe. So
yeah, tangibles for sure.
Yes,
yeah,
right.
Absolutely. So you've written several books, Hardball Retrospective. Let's see, we've got Hardball Retros Compendium of Baseball Video Games and Electronic Handhelds. Definitely gonna have to check that one out. I'll ask one more little question here around the video games, and I'll pass it to Bruce. But I gotta ask, what's your favorite of all time? Like, what's your favorite baseball sim of all time? If you could pick one.
Earl Weaver Baseball for the Amiga.
Gotcha. What was it about that one particularly?
It was so far beyond anything I had seen at the time. If you're not familiar with the Amiga version, or for anybody who's listening who might not be, it just the blend of graphics, sound. It had speech capabilities. You could edit the players' pronunciation of their names. I believe it was the first game with split stats, so it had that component as well. Diving a little bit deeper than some of the prior games, which I had a lot of fun with, such as Micro League and Computer Baseball from SSI.
Yeah.
But those games probably had a fairly limited amount of stats that you could edit, and a handful of ratings. Earl Weaver Baseball probably had 2 or 3 times the number of stats that you could enter. It was physics based, so every base hit was a little bit different, or every hit to the outfield, or so on and so forth. Earl Weaver would come out and argue with the umpire. I mean, there was just all sorts of things. You could build your own ballpark.
Nice.
I mean, the list goes on and on. So that would be my favorite. My current go-to is Digital Diamond Baseball. Not really a graphical game. There is, like, you can put a backdrop, you can put player photos in, logos, and so forth. But that one is more geared towards simulation. But there's a lot, again, that you can do with that. You can edit play-by-play commentary, create your own teams. It comes with every season. So that's what I use. That's what I use when I'm creating, custom years, libraries, whatever you want to call them. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, going back to that previous one, I never got to play that one, but just the fact that Earl Weaver would come out, that makes it the best game ever, honestly.
Right.
So it's fantastic. Bruce, go ahead, man. Take it away.
Yeah, so I was an Atari kid, and Hardball was my series that I played pretty consistently. Every time a new one came out, I grabbed that one. But your description of Earl Weaver reminds me of the first time I picked up Tony La Russa Baseball. It was kind of some of the nuances they put in were just very different than some of the things the other games were doing. That reminds me of that. But so in your books, Derek, we said earlier that you do a really great job of interweaving data and the fundamentals with storytelling within that. Like, what story is the data telling? What story is being created here? And you do a number of interviews throughout the books. Is there one interview that you liked or stood out to you with one person more than another?
I know for Hardball Architects, I did interviews with Fred Clare, Mike Port, and Nick Kroll. And they were all extremely very forthcoming about, the different ways that they, handled certain situations with, regards to their time as general managers. All 3 of them were excellent interviews, and I gained a lot out of that. And then as far as the video game book, we had 6 interviews. Don Daglow, Eddie Dombrower, Tom Tippett, and Mark Lesser. Don't want to forget anybody here. Lance Hafner and Glenn Wolfram. So again, I don't want to like play favorites or anything, but I have had a consistent back and forth discussion over the years with Don Daglow and Eddie Dombrower. So those 2 were in particular. Don wrote the foreword for Hardball Retrospective, and he also was our guest speaker at Sabre 52 in Minnesota. I got to spend time with Don. We talked for hours after after he spoke there. Talked in television. Tony, he was the executive producer for the Tony La Russa series and Old Time Baseball. He did the first Earl Weaver, but then he left Electronic Arts, so he didn't do the second one. And his baseball, computer baseball experience dates back to 1971, where he wrote a program when he was in college. Just fascinating, 50 years worth of, video game history, sitting there in front of me. And if I could talk to myself when I was, 8 or 9 years old playing in television games, and fast forwarding 40 some odd years and sitting across the table from Don Daglow, who was a programmer and later a manager at Mattel Electronics, and going on to write, or program or / design, all of these other games that I spent hours upon hours on, was just incredible. So if I had to single somebody out, I would say Don Daglow.
All right, that's awesome. So you mentioned, I think you mentioned your hardball retroactive in that answer. So one of the things that stands out to me about retroactive is this, this compilation of ideas and things that you've done together. But you talk about things like base running metrics and front office decisions, and just this combination of different things that makes baseball what it is. How do you decide from an analytics standpoint what to write about when you're writing about analytics and data and metrics? And are there any that you found are being overlooked and maybe not given the weight that perhaps they could be given?
So how do I select what I'm going to write about? Was just kind of whatever came to me, at that particular moment. Something, maybe I had read an article somewhere about something and it sparked some interest. Part of it is I'm kind of, again, working in IT and having that background. I started teaching myself how to use like MySQL, R, Excel, all of these tools that someone would use to, analyze data such as this. And some of this stuff is really, large amounts of data. It kind of came along at the point where there was a lot of free information becoming available with the layman database, RetroSheet. I could download their transaction database. There was the baseball gauge on seam heads. So there were just a number of ways that I could start to, play with the data and see what I could come up with. So that was several, a couple of the articles, were taking the extra base. I was able to use the play-by-play data from RetroSheet dating back to like 1950, I think, somewhere in that range, and just having like MySQL or R, just kind of chug through the data and see, how often did player X take the extra base, and how many times, or how many opportunities did he have? How many times did he take the extra base? And I think the top dog there was Dexter Fowler, and I want to say he'd probably be up there regardless. But I feel like there's a little bit of, again, the Coors Field factor there. You have the bigger outfield, and therefore you can take the extra base a little more frequently. So not to say that he wouldn't be among the top, 25 or 50 of all time, but there are other factors to look at, right? So you start, then you can go down the rabbit hole of, looking at ballpark factors and all sorts of things there, which I didn't go that far into it, but that might be a topic to revisit some other day.
Derek, with a stat like that, did you extend that to see how many times that led to an extra run for the team? And, did that produce extra runs? Did you go that far with it?
I didn't go that far with it. I think I started messing with second to home, first to home, a variety of different things, how many times a runner was thrown out.
Yeah.
And again, that's one of those things when you're coming back to the computer sims, usually one of the ratings is outfielder's arm. And if you look at their assist totals, that isn't always an accurate gauge, because a lot of times you'll get an outfielder with a great arm and then nobody runs on him. So therefore he doesn't have any assists or hardly any assists, just nobody challenges him at that point.
Makes sense.
So you can't really base it on that. So something like this, seeing how many times a runner was on first when Jesse Barfield or Vladimir Guerrero Sr. was in the outfield, and how many times did they attempt to go first to third or tag up on a fly ball, that type of thing. So
makes sense.
You could get really deep into the weeds on some of this stuff too. And you also have sample size to consider, right? I mean, there's not a whole lot of opportunities even over the course of a season. So maybe you have to extend it, like, okay, over a 5-year period or a 10-year period or something.
Makes sense. Yeah, definitely. I'm pretty fascinated by this one, Bruce. The what if process. It says your books often reimagine baseball history using data, like in Hardball Retrospective, where players stay with their original franchises. What inspired you to explore baseball through this what if lens, and what has surprised you most through that process?
So going back to when I got my Commodore 64, and that was probably late '83 when I got it, and my first baseball games there were probably more the arcade type of stuff, like Hardball, Star League Baseball. There were a few like that I played. Micro League was kind of a game changer for me, where I guess in my analytical mind and strategy and selecting what pitch to throw and whether to bunt or just hit and run or steal, that type of thing. And I think I quickly got bored of just having the standard teams. It probably came with like the 1984 season or whatever it came with. And I know they came out with team discs and different things. But one of the things that was interesting, they also came with like an AL and NL greats from a variety of seasons.
Yeah. And
I was like, oh, well, I can start to mix and match people here. And, what if I come up with like a franchise greats? Okay, and my team just happens to be the Angels. So I would say, like, okay, what if I played the Angels all-time greats against the Yankees, and, how would that turn out? So I think Hardball Retrospective was just kind of an extension of that premise. But somewhere along the line, I don't recall exactly when I came up with that idea, was, what if, maybe not an extremely accurate way of doing this, but what if I kept everybody on the first team that they signed a pro contract with, and just extended out, over a period of years, and see, then I could kind of base, like, okay, how are the Angels doing in comparison to these other teams over the course of 5 years or a decade or whatever the case may be. So it kind of grew out of that.
I love that. That's awesome. Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah. So let's talk for a minute about your experience in Sabre. So as the co-chair of the Games and Simulations Committee, I know you do a lot of research. I know you do a lot of, obviously, game playing, right, as part of that as well. With that in mind, where do you see the future of baseball analytics and analysis going in the future, especially when we consider the impact of AI on the way we consume, manipulate, and understand data?
So I don't know if any particular teams have come out and directly stated, how much or what simulations they use for these things, but I do know that several teams, it could be all of these teams, I really don't know what the extent is, but some teams definitely use games like Out of the Park to simulate certain scenarios. And you can run a lot of the computer sims now will allow you to run this what if type of thing, and they'll put this particular base runner on second, and how many times will he score on a certain type of play, and just run that simulation over 10,000 iterations, and or the same thing, when should we bunt? When does it make sense to bunt? Does it make sense to hit and run? You often hear like, oh, it doesn't make sense to steal unless you can make it 75% of the time. Don't make the first out at third base. All these different things. Well, is there any validity to those? Some of these really old, baseball cliches or whatever you want to call them. So I think that's one way that where teams now might be using some of these simulations, that they might be starting to use AI to answer some of these questions. But it is, we've had a lot of interest in the committee since my co-chair, Mark Wendling, and I, we volunteered to take over the committee. I think it was back in August of 2022 or thereabouts. And so we just try to engage our committee members and even anybody who's interested. You don't have to be a member of SABR to join our meetings. We try to get guests on that have designed, either a computer baseball sim, tabletop card and dice games. We've had on some fantasy baseball experts. So it just kind of runs the gamut. Anything that kind of qualifies as a game, a game that has something to do with baseball. We try to be very inclusive in that regard. And if anybody wants to check out our website, it's saberbaseballgaming.com. We have videos from the past events. We have the upcoming events on there. Some committee members will write articles for us. So it's pretty much a wide range of topics on there. So and I've had a blast connecting with folks. While we're on the topic of SABR, that's actually where I met my co-author for the latest for the video game book, and that's John Racanelli. I met him at the SABR convention in Chicago, where we had decided to set up a table in the exhibit area. I had several laptops with various RBI baseball and old time baseball, APBA, different things, where folks could come by and they'd play an inning or two of the game. And John had written a couple articles for us about baseball, handheld baseball games. So he shows up at our table with just Mattel baseball, Coleco head-to-head, starting lineup, some of these games that I'd never even heard of. And it dawned on me about a year later when I decided to start the book. I'm like, we need a chapter on handheld games. I've really never even played them. But I'm like, okay, I have a resource here. I know John is an expert in this subject, and he has just about every one that ever came out. So I got in touch with John. He wrote that chapter, and it's an excellent read for anyone who's ever played any of those handhelds. And actually, one of the interviews is Mark Lesser. He was the programmer for the Mattel baseball game. So that was interesting to me because, again, it's different. There's some, it's still baseball logic, But it's little LED lights and, a couple bleeps and bloops, not a whole lot to it, if you compare it to, the current, MLB The Show. And if you play that and then you show somebody the Mattel baseball game, it's like, okay, all right. Well, at least you have a reference point of, how all these things, came into being. And but if you look at Mattel baseball and then 10 years later, you look at starting lineup baseball, which had had an announcer, it had cartridges that you plugged into it. So again, just in a short period of time, a lot of advances in the technology and everything. So
Yeah, it's amazing how far we've come since
yeah,
the 80s. Or were you ever a Stratomatic guy? Did you ever play Stratomatic?
I've hardly played any tabletop baseball.
Yeah.
It just wasn't, growing up, none of my friends really had it. I guess if I was 5 or 10 years older, it might have been the thing. But we all grew up. Somebody had an Atari. I had the Intellivision. Somebody had a ColecoVision, and so forth. And then, fast forward a couple years, and I've got a Commodore 64. Somebody has an Atari 800. Somebody has an Apple II, and it just kind of blossomed from there. So we were on and on and on. Somebody had a Nintendo, somebody had a Sega Genesis, right? So we always had we always had plenty of games to go around, and sometimes we trade on and off different things, but that's just what I grew up with. So I really just never even came across the tabletop gaming until much more recent.
Yeah, I grew up in the Nintendo generation. I missed out on a lot of the Atari, and I know I can hear our younger listeners furiously typing away to look up Coleco and television.
Television.
But yeah, but we can't. Yeah, when my friends and I, when we were teenagers, King Griffey Jr. baseball was our standard. That was the one we enjoyed the most. But this is fascinating to me because rarely do I get to talk to people who love numbers and video games and put it together with my passion for baseball. So this is great stuff. Um, your recent book dives into the world of baseball video games and the handhelds. What role do you think these games have played in shaping fans' connection to the sport, especially among the younger generations?
I think it's really key to bringing in some of the younger generations. MLB The Show, but even prior to that, I guess even when we were growing up, some of those early games, there was no licensing. You didn't have player names. Some of them didn't even have team names. They didn't have uniforms, any of that stuff. But it was still, at its core, it was baseball. You could argue that Atari Home Run, it might have been more like stickball, right? But it was still an approximation. It was how many moving objects could you get on the screen, right? So I don't know. I just find that it enhances my enjoyment. I'm mostly into simulation. I'm not into like I like to play with the real players. I don't like some people play with fictional players. I don't know. I just prefer to use the real thing, and it just kind of broadens my view of the historical. Even going back into the early 1900s, just learning some of these players and teams that I probably would have never even known about.
Yeah.
And I know the show does that to some extent. They have some, I guess, player cards or different things where you can get, players from bygone eras, I guess. So.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. If I'm doing that, I want to use the actual players. I'm with you on that for sure.
Yep.
Bruce, what else you got, buddy?
Yeah, so Derek, I think that I'm a pretty avid out of the park baseball player. You've helped me with a couple of things with that over time. Why diamond over OTP for your simulation? What draws you to one direction over the other? Now, I can tell you I do OTP because there's a pretty mature online league community there, and that's how I do it. So how do you do it?
I don't know. usually every couple years I'll try out whatever the new flavor of game is, and I have gone back and forth with Out of the Park. There's nothing wrong with it per se, but I have found the number of times that I go back to Out of the Park, I almost feel like I'm overwhelmed by the amount of options that I have, and I'm not sure, like, okay, if I enable this and I disable that, how is it affecting what I'm doing? And it's not that, these other Action PC Baseball, Digital Diamond, Diamond Mind, all of these games have a plethora of options that you can turn on and off. So I don't know what it is about Out of the Park. I don't dislike the game. It's just I find myself going down the rabbit hole. Like, okay, I turn this off. I turn the finances off. I don't care about the finances. I don't care about the team chemistry. There's a lot of different things in there, right? I just care about simulating a game, right, or a season. So that would be my only. I don't know if it's even a complaint, but it's just something. When I've tried to get into Out of the Park, that's been one of my stumbling blocks, I guess.
That seems reasonable. I mean, I struggle with the complexity of it at times as well. When you just want to do something sometimes, right? You want to put a team together and you just want to play. That is a struggle in Out of the Park to be able to just say, I want my favorite players on the same team.
Yeah, I almost
that takes so much time.
Not like an Out of the Park for dummies necessarily, but almost like a simplified menu. If you want to go deep dive, rabbit hole, whatever, it's there. But I would like the option of like, hey, I just want, I want to simulate a season this particular year. I'll manage this club. All the others are computer manager and play ball. Like, I just feel like I have to tick so many boxes and uncheck and, oh, wait, did I turn that off? Wait, I forgot to do that. And I don't know. I kind of get lost. I tried to screenshot it. I tried to do all these things in OneNote. So I'm not, so I can, because my other thing is I want to replicate what I did the previous time. If I'm doing, a lot of times I do like either a decade's worth or 5-year chunks. And so let's say I do 1980 to 84 and I complete that. Now I want to do 85 through 89. I want to make sure I have the exact same settings, right? So it's not, oh, well, one time I had the finances turned on and I had the computer is allowed to trade players, and then it skews everything because I didn't want it to do that. So
you don't like setting the hot dog prices. You're good without that.
I
that
don't. You know what? Honestly, that's another one. And I like the game. I've played a number of seasons. Baseball Mogul, right? You can do the concessions. You can do.
Forgot about that one, Derek.
Right.
Yeah.
That's another one. And we had Clay Dresslow on one of our Sabre meetings. Excellent interview with him. He also has a card and dice game called Season Ticket Baseball. But I love Baseball Mogul, but I sometimes, I'm like, I just want to, I don't care about the concessions or, the TV revenue and this stuff. I just want to simulate a season. So
I agree. Yeah. Sounds like we're very similar in that respect. I agree. I don't need all that stuff. I just want to get to the actual game. Yeah.
I want to be the GM. I don't want to be the owner.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yep. Absolutely. And not over the concessions. Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Yeah,
I want to micromanage, but not that much.
Not to that point. Yeah, I agree. I agree. And all those are overpriced anyway. So
exactly.
So Derek, you said the Angels are your team? Is that like your childhood team you grew up with? And
it's so like you mentioned, I'm born and raised in New Jersey, so you might wonder why I'm an Angels fan. My cousin Tom was an Angels fan. I started watching my cousins play Little League around that time, and gonna say 1983, 1984 time frame. and I hadn't played any sports until I think like sixth grade, but I was watching them play and I kind of got into it. Started collecting baseball cards. Um, and the first game I went to was Angels at Yankees. And pretty much everybody in my family was either Yankees or Mets. And I'm like, well, I would like to be different here, so I'm going to root for the Angels. At the time, they had Rod Carew, Reggie Jackson, Bobby Grich, just a number of these veteran guys, and it was like this, the average age of the team was like 35 years old, but they had, after struggling quite a bit in their early years, they had won a couple division titles by then. I suffered through the '86 playoffs. That was difficult, and then they kind of fell off the radar, until they won the World Series in 2002. So
Yeah.
They're 1-0 in World Series
Undefeated.
competition.
Undefeated.
So
It's like the Marlins,
right.
undefeated.
So Rod Carew was my favorite player. Was a big fan of Wally Joyner, and then Tim Salmon, Garrett Anderson, some of those guys, and Trout and Ohtani. Unfortunately, we couldn't afford to keep Ohtani, and Trout is having trouble staying on the field. So
very unfortunate. Very unfortunate. Love watching him play when he's healthy.
Yes.
Bruce, what else you got, buddy?
So one last question for me, Derek. Out of the books that you've written, which one is the one that's closest to your heart? Which one do you, if I asked you, Derek, give me your favorite book out of the ones you've written, which one are you handing me and why?
That's like, who's your favorite child?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's a really tough call. I really I had a lot of fun with the first one, although that one took me the longest to write. I think I was a good 3 years on that one. And again, I'm working a full-time job, 3 kids, wife and 3 kids, and soccer practices and all these other things. So I'm squeezing in, 15 minutes here, 30 minutes there. If not for Excel and some of these other programs, it would have been near impossible to write that. And one of the other things when you invited me on here, I started thinking about is we're starting to see a reversal of the trend of the freely available data. So one of the websites I got the win shares and wins above replacement information was the baseball gauge, which I think that was available through about 2020 or 2021. So unfortunately, I don't have easy access to win shares anymore. I do actually prefer it to wins above replacement. And I would say one of the main reasons for that is that every website does wins above replacement a little bit differently. I have never seen a formula on how it's calculated anywhere. Granted, win shares is quite a convoluted process to calculate them as well. So it's not as if there's some simple formula that you can just plug in and all right, here's the value. But I did appreciate the fact that Bill James went through the effort of explaining his methodology in the book. And I feel like it's a good way to compare players across eras. Is it perfect? No, but I don't think WAR is perfect either. I don't think we have a perfect number to, a single number to boil down, for every player and, cross era comparisons and all that. And thinking on baseball, well, all the ballpark dimensions are different. There's really no other sport like it, maybe with the exception of golf, or, there might be a few others, auto racing. Yes, there's, not every track is the same, but, football, basketball, hockey, they're all built to an exact specification. Every ballpark is different. Even from year to year, sometimes somebody will bring a fence in here or there. Maybe the weather affected things differently. So it's really, really tough to compare players across eras. So I would say that Hardball Retrospective was, even though it was probably the longest to write, I felt like I learned just a ton of things about the different franchises and how they acquired players and what they looked for in different players. And of course, that changes over the years as well. Different GMs, different owners, some owners not willing to pay, for players. So, the data varies over the years, but, I learned about, let's say, one of the teams in there that I noticed was the San Francisco Giants of the 60s and 70s produced, I don't know, 15 to 20 major league outfielders from that time period. The list was incredible to me. And if you just based it on those numbers, they probably should have won, 8 or 10 pennants in that time frame. But if you look at their pitching, pitching that they signed and developed, other than Juan Marichal, maybe a couple other guys, Gaylord Perry, but they were a little thin on the pitching and a little bit thin on infield. So, everything all balances out. But it was interesting to see, like, okay, if this team had kept, these players, how would things have panned out? So if I had to pick one, that would be my favorite book. But I had a blast writing the video game book as well. I know it's a pretty niche topic, but it's one that I've always appreciated the amount of work that goes into building, a video game or a simulation like this. Certain games that maybe fell short because of deadlines. Hey, we got to get this game out so it'll be available for the holiday season. And it's like, oh, well, we'll issue a patch later, but if I don't want to name any particular games here, but there were some games where they were released before they were ready, and it really either hurt or killed, that series. And it was just like, if you just, I understand all the dollars and cents and everything around it, but you can't put a game out before it's not ready. So,
Yeah, it's a shame.
Yeah.
So thank you, Derek, I feel like I could sit down and talk to you for a long time. We could, there's a lot of stuff here. But I'll get you out of here on this question. All the statistical data you've seen and looked at and written about, if you were building a major league roster today, what is and you had to narrow it down to one offensive stat to judge players' effectiveness. What are you looking at to build a roster today more than anything else?
And we're looking at players who have, are we talking about drafting players, or are we talking about players that are, like, let's say, if I was just starting a franchise today and I was an expansion team, is that what we're?
Yeah, let's say you're drafting from existing major league players. Let's go with that.
Okay. One single stat. I would say, like, when I'm trying to figure out, when I'm in these, fantasy baseball auctions or different things.
Yeah.
Right or wrong, I'm looking at OPS for offense, and pitching, I'm looking at WHIP. I don't look at ERA. I might sprinkle in some strikeouts per 9. But yeah, that if I had to pick something along those lines, that would probably be OPS, because you're getting okay, maybe adding those two numbers together isn't the greatest way to do that, but you're looking at on base, you're looking at slugging. So, this is a productive player. If and again, we're not talking about defense now either, right? So,
Yeah.
there's just so many variables, a player's age, am I gonna, right? Even now it's like, okay, you're gonna sign, I don't understand these, 12, 14-year contracts.
Yep, absolutely.
We suffered, and hey, great player, Albert Pujols on the Angels. All it took was, he got the foot injury and the plantar fasciitis, and he was kind of done. And they were stuck with him for what, 9-10 years.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And then you're clogging, you're clogging a DH spot because you don't want to cut him. Or he's playing first base, and maybe they, I don't know. It's just the numbers. Okay, whatever amount you're making, that's a different thing. The owner's willing to pay you. That's not what I'm talking about, but just the length of contract, I guess, is it just blows my mind with some of these. And it's one of the things that Bill James talked about, the age curve. Okay, well, PEDs really skewed those numbers, but if we're back, if we're on the assumption that everything's on the up and up, you don't want to be paying guys, in their late 30s. They're not going to produce the way they did, in their late 20s.
Right.
It's just, and to give pitchers these long-term deals is just, I don't know, crazy to me.
No, I agree completely.
Ask the Yankees how they feel about that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of my fellow Braves fans are still upset about the Freddie Freeman thing, and right now it looks bad because Freddie's raking. But
Mm-hmm.
when he gets to the end of that contract, let's ask the Dodgers how that's working out for him. It's
Yeah.
just it happens with every baseball player. There's that natural regression. So I'm glad to hear you say OPS though. That's one stat that I look at a lot too. So it makes me feel better about that.
Sure.
Derek, again, man, thank you. This was great. Like I said, I could talk to you all night. Video games, numbers is great. We appreciate you coming on, and we'll post a link to the Saber site and also to your books as well. So
Okay.
thank you
Perfect.
so much, man.
Thank you for having me on.